Well, greetings YouTube once again, and also once again, there's really nothing new out to talk about on this podcast, so we're going back to reviewing a classic film. Or at least a classic for the science fiction slash fantasy subgenre, and that is of course 1986 Highlander. This is literally a film that truly defines cult film status. It wasn't a major hit when it came out, but it became a legendary film with an extremely devoted fan base. Nowadays, pretty much every movie is given a cult, is said it's a cult favorite. That's really not the case. I suppose we could always do a side video of that, but let's just say one or two things. One, to have a cult fan base, you actually have to have a decent size, very dedicated fan base, not just one or two websites with a couple of fans here or there. Two, it can't be an overwhelming majority unless the film is old at this point. You know, people say Transformers has a cult following. No, it doesn't. It's a mainstream film. You might hate the film and all that stuff, but you can't say a film that generates $500 million in box office is a cult favorite. No, that is a mainstream favorite. There's nothing wrong with a film being a mainstream favorite. Hell, look at Star Wars. But it's not a cult. This is a true cult film. Mainly because, well, outside of the pure definition of having a dedicated fan base to a film that necessarily wasn't a major hit, it also is very weird when you come and think about it. I mean, just think about the plot. There's guys running around that are immortal, and they have an uncontrollable desire to start killing each other in order to win some sort of vague prize. The only way they can die is having their heads cut off. It's strangely original and also strangely 80s. And I think that's why it works. Of course, it stars Christopher Lambert, Sean Connery, and Clancy Brown as the main characters. Christopher Lambert giving his big performance here as Duncan MacLeod, who does not even try to fake a Scottish accent. Yeah. As a Scottish swordsman, not peasant, but a Scottish clansman who goes off to battle for the first time, is stabbed by Clancy Brown, and then doesn't die from it, and then is immediately accused of being a witch. Which is kind of weird. I mean, they're trying to go, yes, it's the devil, instead of going, it's a miracle. Kind of slight fault on the film, I think. Should have been perhaps if there was something more demonic associated with how they turn for the first time, and when the first time you truly become immortal or realize you're immortal, they have some sort of demonic looking spirit or something come around you, or something along those lines to make the medieval peasants to go, demon! Because considering the guy was extremely well liked, I mean, the film shows that Duncan MacLeod was a really well-liked guy and all that. Very respectable within the clan. You figure they would more go, God has come down and saved him. You know, you got the priest's last blessing and all that. Really, I think medieval society would be more likely to go with that. Perhaps if he was already an outcast and not well-liked, then I could see them going, he's consorted with the devil. After all, he does have a Swiss accent. But yeah, I think that is one fault of the film I didn't quite buy. I mean, most people that aren't as into history as I am probably would just go, yes, medieval times, they'll just think everything's Satan. I think that needed to be a little well done. But of course, Christopher Lambert wanders off, where he eventually just meets another woman. They don't really explain how he meets the other girl in the movie, but hey, it's Christopher Lambert. I can believe he can just pick up any girl. Picks up another woman, and Sean Connery shows up. You know, an actual Scotsman who's playing a Spaniard who's Egyptian. And he doesn't, of course, as he never does, hide his Scottish accent. You gotta love that. Just the mess of accents. Of course, Clancy Brown shows up with his American accent, where he's supposed to be, when there weren't even Americans at the time. Well, I mean, other than Native Americans. Uh, so the accents, it's fun. I mean, especially when they go right to Christopher Lambert. They're like, where are you from? There's lots of different places. Even though his voice sounds exactly the same as it was back when he was in, Scotland. Uh, but that's a nitpick. The film really is deserving of its cult status because it has such a weird ass premise, uh, and an enjoyable premise. It's also extremely moody. It really fits, I think, with that tech noir style that James Cameron tried to do in the Terminator. You could really look at this film and the Terminator as really visually being very well companion pieces to one another. Sure, this film actually probably does have a lot more brightly lit scenes, but the scenes at night are quite very much shot in that same style, that same look, and it's a very 80s look. I mean, look at the last battle between Duncan MacLeod there and Clancy Brown's The Kurgan, with that blue backlight, with that windowed wall with that blue light that you can't see through, and you see the silhouettes of the two guys fighting, and really that's like the iconic image, I think, of this film is that end fight. It's very music video like, which shouldn't be too surprising since Russell McCauley. Yeah. Once again, for those of you that actually watch my podcast, or I should say listen to, I fucked up the name again. But the director, uh, who has really done a lot of music videos. This guy's really a big music guy. I mean, one of his earlier films, the film he did before this was a film about, a rock band's performances. So, it's a guy who's worked with Duran Duran, has done compilation stuff, and you can really see that music video style in that last battle with that whole backdrop thing, and probably a little bit also with the trippiness of kind of the entire movie. And it's not trippy as in like a real full-on surreal, everything's weird, but it's got a very strange presence. Even Christopher Lambert's performances as Duncan MacLeod, especially when he's in New York, you kind of feel like he's a guy that's like really like doing some hard drugs or something. And I think that's the way it kind of feels, even though you know from the plot that it's probably more because he's just tired of life, and he's lived this really long, rough life. He's lost pretty much everyone he's ever loved. He's got to go through all this bullshit of having the pressures of immortality on him. The fact that there's guys trying to kill him because it's the Gathering, which I guess we'll get into the whole mythos in a little bit, but it really does feel like he's a kind of a drug, that his performance is like he's like somewhat of a drug addict almost, or a drunkard, and I think it works. It works because I guess the feeling is supposed to be the same, but it's an interesting little comparison, especially how he does his performance, and also then when you see at the end the levity he has and the life he's in there when he's sitting in a big open field and he's got all this excitement then again about life again. It's good for a character change where we see how he was very, when he was a regular mortal in Scotland, he was very likable and giddy, and he has those performances. He has that fucking Christopher Lambert laugh, which is I've tried and my friends have tried to recreate that fucking ha ha ha. That it's so much of a simple basic laugh that he just says ha ha ha, but the way he says it, I wish I had clips on my computer, but I don't right now, and I don't feel like searching for them. Speaking of the director, what I just talked about, it's kind of interesting. After this, he didn't really do that much of other major stuff. And I think what is to blame there is Highlander 2, because Highlander 2 became such a massive failure and became the epitome of a bad sequel. I think it really delayed his film career, but yeah, he went on to do other stuff like Blue Ice and The Real McCoy, but they weren't as big hits. They weren't the major pictures. Um, he did Russell there did try to come back a little bit in the 90s, but apparently enough time had passed, and he tried to do really one of the earliest comic or modern comic book films in The Shadow, but that one also didn't do so well, and he really remains really mainly now a TV director. Although he did do Resident Evil Extinction, and I could say some stuff because even I've said there was a lot of problems with Extinction, but I mean on a technical level, it was shot well. The performances were all right. You know, most of the problems people complain with Extinction was the script, and he didn't write the movie, so I can't blame him for that. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it really actually, if you think about it, Christopher Lambert had a similar thing. He's always been. He seems to be a guy that likes the weird and unusual roles, which is why I guess he did another Paul W.S. Anderson film. Speaking of Resident Evil Extinction, of course, going to be rated. Woo! Sorry about that. Going, of course, later to be rated in Mortal Kombat, and really, after this, Christopher Lambert hasn't done a whole lot other than other Highlander stuff. I mean, really, if you look at his filmography, yeah, he's done stuff, but not like the major roles. You figure a guy that did somewhat of an iconic role, at least for the 80s. I mean, I think Mortal Kombat was probably his biggest role after that. I mean, he's done a lot of stuff. He's done stuff in Europe. And of course, he's also done the Fortress series. Did I even bring that up? Though he's scheduled to be in Ghost Rider, which I'm really excited about. But I really should get on back onto track. I mean, Sean Connery is the fucking legend. We don't need to do that. Clancy Brown has. Yeah, I just talked to him about he was in Cowboys and Aliens. Because we were really getting sidetracked with that. I want to get really into the mythos of Highlander, because I think the mythos is what people really love about this film. It's a very interesting premise because, in all honesty, there are technical problems with this film. There is a pacing issue. The editing could be improved upon. It's not a perfect film. It's far from a perfect film, and I think the limitations of Russell McCallie, no, there's no L at the end of that. Whatever his name is. Is kind of shown. I mean, this is again one of his earlier films. This was a relatively low budget film too when it was done, and you could tell this was supposed to be an early. This was an early career film for this guy, and it does show for that. There's some issues with it. Technical, but it's tolerable. I mean, really, if you look at other films from the same era, it's not horrible, but it does have. How should I put it? I keep on saying issues, and I hate to repeat myself there, but it does have technical problems. Especially, I think, with pacing. It's at some points a little too choppy. It's also at times, if you're really not into this type of film, and you want to be a little bit more passive, it might be a little bit harder to pick up on some of the more implied stuff. I think they should have been a little bit more clear, and it's sometimes harder to understand character motivations, especially with the main the main female, Brenda. You're a little bit more confused about some of the stuff she does or why she's doing a certain thing, and the cops are a little too stereotypical. But that, I think, is just the fact that it's not the 80s anymore. But the mythos, I think, is what makes all those slight issues go right out the door, because it has such an interesting and original plot. The idea that there's a group of people out there, a small group of people, who are effectively immortal. They can't really die unless you cut off their head. You can be thrown underwater. They'll just breathe. I guess they can't starve to death either. Of course, the sequels and the series try to expand on this, but it's questionable whether sometimes some people don't like. Some people want to treat every incarnation of this franchise, every sequel and the series as completely separate entities, which actually probably does work out better. But it's interesting. They basically they're all immortal. The other way, cut off the head. And apparently they also have like a spider sense where they can kind of feel each other. That this one's really not explained. It's really not explained how the Kurgan knows that MacLeod is a pre-immortal in Scotland, and I guess or how Connery really found them. Uh, it's I guess really heavily implied that there is some sort of deity figure or something watching over these guys, perhaps a demon, because of the demonic imagery you see later on. And these guys really don't know that they're immortal from birth, or I think the series later says that they were foundlings, or they were just kind of found and picked up as kids. But they're immortal, and they are just basically biding their time through forever until they have an uncontrollable urge to go to a location for what's called the Gathering. When only a few of these immortals are left, they'll go and they'll basically just fight each other in this location until only one remains, and that one person gets the prize. What's the prize? They don't really know. Well, at least they don't know until, well, we don't find out till the end of the movie. But that's it. Apparently the prize is of such great power, if an evil immortal gets it, he will bring darkness upon the earth. It's an interesting ordeal because this does sound like something that's pure fantasy, but then it's also taking place in modern time, and I think that's what brings it to that interesting thing. Plus, there's just how much is not explained. They don't explain who's controlling this stuff. They don't even explain where the rules originate from. And I think it's that mystery. That's the thing. This film knows what to tell and what not to tell. To leave enough stuff unexplained for you to go, wow, really? That's why is it doing that? And then I think why are these things that way? And I think how this works is, or for the audience is, unlike the film telling you what the explanation is for this stuff, you as the audience speculate a bit. Like, oh, is there a god creating this stuff? Is there just a mother spirit that connects only these individuals? Is there a demon that's just doing this for shits and giggles? Are these guys demons? Are they gulp aliens? You don't know. I mean, when they cut their heads off, they have this surge of energy that goes through them. There's this massive amount of power. Why are they immortal? And thus you come up with your own explanations, and therefore the explanation that you think up is probably something that you yourself would buy more. So if you would buy more and find it acceptable if it's just this is just God doing this, then hey, that's the one you find most. You kind of buy that yourself, even though you know you're not told that. If you want to just say that they're aliens, you probably liked Highlander too. But you will buy that. There can't be that many people, I guess, that did that. But that's what works, and I think that's the secret to this film. It's that they didn't say as much. They said what they needed to say. They gave some basic rules, but they didn't explain the background as much. They left it purposely vague. And it wasn't like they just script they forgot to say this stuff. You could tell that the characters would ask that, like, well, how do you know this? And like, why is your scar blue? Or I forget what he said exactly, but they lampshade that, so that shows that it was purposely done. And it's really the mythos and it's the combination of the mythos and this very 80s tech noir style filmmaking that really sold this film and made it a cult classic that really got particular people to really, really like it. It's not for everyone, though. A lot of people will watch this film and go, this is fucking weird. I don't get it. There will be those people. Which is why it wasn't a massive hit. There was also a lot of people that'll sit there and start noticing the more the technical difficulties with this film. Like I said, the choppy editing, the pacing, and some of the story plot and character motivations. There'll be issues there. Perhaps even some people that won't like the over-top performances. It is a very 80s film, and I think that's another thing that really hit this. When this came out, it was very much encapsulates the style and the feel of the 80s. I mean, they have Queen doing the soundtrack and such, so you can really easily see why people back in the 80s like this is an ultra-modern movie. Now, for a lot of people, well, not maybe not a lot, but for a good number of people today, that 80s feel, shall I say? Well, maybe not feel, but that 80s style and the 80s culture, not stereotypical 80s culture, but actual 80s culture, is going to feel a little less. They're not going to get it. They won't have that same feeling, which is the other thing I think this film has. And I've been going on for quite a while now, so I should probably start wrapping things up. In conclusion, Highlander is a damn good film. If you're probably listening to this, then you've seen the movie, you've liked it, and are interested in seeing what other people have said or have also said. Maybe you're wondering why you yourself like this. If you enjoy 80s film, or 80s cinema, you pretty much, I think, have to at least appreciate this film. If you don't love it, you at least appreciate it, and it does incorporate a lot of that 80s feel to it. I'm not talking about necessarily full-on 80s. I don't want to say 80s pop culture, because I think this is part of the pop culture, but that pop subgenre of music, you know what I'm talking about, the more mainstream at the time, but this was the grungy 80s. Or if you weren't growing up during that time, you just like that style for whatever reason. Or some people just really like this mix of modern fantasy, which is really, you don't see too many modern fantasies, really. I mean, even you could say Harry Potter, but Harry Potter I wouldn't say is what they would call a modern fantasy, because it's technically taking place in the modern day, and they do occasionally have scenes in the modern world. It's clearly that there's two separate worlds of wizards and muggles and such. And I think that distinction, and the fact that it's taking place mostly in a separate world, really doesn't make it really a modern, strictly speaking, fantasy. If you want to see what a modern fantasy film is, i.e. fantasy that's set in a modern real world that has fantastical elements to it, look at Highlander, and you'll see what we're talking about. I think that's really it. If you haven't seen this movie, though, I do recommend you check it out. If you like science fiction or fantasy, you'll like this. I cannot say that you'll like the sequels, because even fans of the sequels will probably... fans of the sequels. Fans of the original really don't like the sequels. And if you are going to plan on watching the sequels, actually, I almost would recommend seeing Highlander 2 first, because you'll have a much better appreciation of the film. I might get into that later. If maybe later on this weekend I'll do a second podcast for Highlander 2. But for the time being, that's my opinions on Highlander, why it succeeds, why it's a cult film, why it's actually a cult film. That's it for now. Signing off.